Do that. Let's start with a hard truth to a narcissist. You're not really you. At least not in the way you think. You're not seen as a person with your own dreams, fears, and history. You're seen as an instrument, something to be used. A mirror, a status symbol. Do that. Cheerleader, a shield. Whatever role they need filled in that moment, that's what you become in their eyes. And when you're no longer useful in that role, you're dismissed, replaced, or worse. Blamed for the fallout. This isn't just about being used in an additional sense. It's deeper. It's existential. Narcissists operate from a fractured sense of identity. Underneath the inflated ego, beneath the grandiosity, is an emptiness, a core belief that they are not enough. So they create a false self, a mask. And to keep that mask intact, they need people who will reflect back only what they want to see. That's where you come in. They look at you and think, how can you serve my image? Not who are you? What do you need? But how can I benefit from having you near me? That's why so many people who are close to narcissists feel invisible, because in a very real sense, they are. The narcissist doesn't really see you. They see the version of you that makes them feel powerful, admired, and important. And if you start showing signs of being a real person, someone with needs or boundaries, that's when things turn dark. This is what makes relationships with narcissists so confusing and frankly, so damaging. In the beginning, they may shower you with attention, compliments, affection. They make you feel like the center of their universe. But what's actually happening is that they're sizing you up, evaluating how well you'll serve their ego. And if you pass that test, you're in temporarily, but it's not love. But it's utility. Now, here's the heartbreaking part, even if you care deeply about them. Even if you sacrifice for them, stand by them, forgive them. They don't internalize that love in the way most people do. They register it as supply. You're feeding them your part. But as soon as your role threatens their illusion, you criticize them. If you set a boundary, if you shine too brightly or struggle too deeply, they start to withdraw. Or worse, retaliate. And it's not because you failed. It's because they never saw you in the first place. This is the part many people struggle with, especially in intimate relationships or with narcissistic parents. You keep thinking, if I just love them better, if I'm more patient, more understanding, maybe they'll finally see me. Maybe they'll change. But that thinking comes from your values, not theirs. You believe in reciprocity, empathy, emotional growth. They believe in control, image, and self-preservation. And here's where philosophy comes in. The ancient Stoics talked about the concept of control, what we can influence versus what we cannot. You cannot make a narcissist see your humanity if they're committed to preserving their illusion. Do that. You can't reason with someone who doesn't believe you exist outside your usefulness. You can only control how you respond to the reality they create. This doesn't mean you have to hate them, but it does mean you need to stop hoping for validation from someone incapable of giving it. You have to reclaim your sense of self, not as a reaction to their rejection, but as an affirmation of your own worth. And for anyone wondering, why would someone be like this? The answer isn't always cruelty. Sometimes it's upbringing. Narcissism is often born from deep emotional wounds, but understanding that doesn't mean you should sacrifice yourself to heal them. Compassion is not the same as self-abandonment. Do that. So what do you do with this knowledge? You start seeing clearly. You stop confusing conditional praise for love. You stop explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. And most importantly, you start choosing relationships where your humanity isn't negotiable, because you are not a tool. You are not a mirror. You are not a placeholder for someone else's insecurities. You are a person with thoughts, emotions, dreams, and intrinsic value. Let that be the standard from now on. Let's talk about something that most people don't want to believe, especially if they've loved a narcissist. And it's this: your pain to them is not a moment for empathy. It's a problem, a threat, an inconvenience. Now, on the surface, a narcissist might seem caring. They might offer the right words, the concerned look, even a hug if it helps them maintain their image. But when you really need support, when you're vulnerable, messy, raw, that's when the mask starts to slip. Suddenly, you're being too emotional, too needy, too dramatic. They may withdraw, minimize your feelings, or twist the situation to make themselves the victim. Because your pain disrupts the storyline they're trying to live in, one where they're in control, admired, and never at fault. Here's the psychology behind it. Narcissists have incredibly fragile egos. They've built their identity on an illusion of superiority, strength, and emotional invincibility. So when you bring real emotion into the picture, grief, anxiety, fear, especially if it's connected to something they did, it shatters that illusion. And rather than confront their part in your suffering, they rewrite the narrative. Suddenly you're the unstable one, or the ungrateful one, or the one making everything about yourself. This isn't just defensiveness, it's survival. Narcissists don't process guilt or shame the way most people do. Those emotions threaten the entire structure of the false self they've built to survive in the world. So they eject that discomfort by projecting it onto others. You're the problem. You're too sensitive. You're trying to start a fight. What's truly heartbreaking is how consistently this plays out. Imagine opening up about something painful, and instead of receiving comfort, you get silence or sarcasm. Or worse, a lecture about how hard they have it. Over time, you learn that being vulnerable around this person is dangerous. You learn to suppress, to shrink, to edit yourself, not because your emotions are wrong, but because they're unwelcome. And let's be real, that kind of environment changes you. You start questioning your own emotional reality. You wonder if you are too sensitive. You start apologizing for crying, for needing reassurance, for simply being human. That internalized shame isn't an accident. It's a coping mechanism born in the shadow of someone who treats your suffering like a nuisance. Now here's where philosophy intersects with psychology. Think about the concept of dignity, the idea that every person, regardless of their state, has worth. not because of what they produce or how polished they are, but because they are conscious beings with an inner life. That dignity doesn't disappear when you're in pain. If anything, that's when it needs to be most protected. But narcissists often don't recognize that. Not because they're evil, but because their emotional framework doesn't allow space for anything that undermines their control. Your breakdown reminds them of their own buried chaos. Your tears force them to confront feelings they've spent a lifetime avoiding. So instead of leaning in, they push away. Here's the tragic irony. You might find yourself comforting them during your own crisis. You're apologizing while you're bleeding. You're explaining your pain in soft, digestible doses so you don't scare them off. And at some point, if you're honest with yourself, you realize that you're not in a relationship, you're in a performance. And the one thing you're not allowed to be is real. But being real is non-negotiable. You cannot build a life, let alone a relationship, on emotional censorship. Love without space for pain is not love. It's image management. And no matter how strong the illusion is, it will eventually collapse under the weight of your suppressed truth. So here's the question you need to ask yourself. When I'm hurting, does this person make space for me? Or do I disappear? That answer tells you everything. Because if someone only values you when you're pleasant, functional, and easy, they don't value you. They value what you give them. And that's not love. That's ego preservation dressed up as connection. You are allowed to be messy. You are allowed to hurt. And you are worthy of relationships where your pain isn't treated like a burden, but like a signal, a call for care, for presence, for humanity. Because your vulnerability is not the problem. It's the proof that you're alive. And you deserve to be seen for all of it, not just the parts that are convenient. Here's something people rarely say out loud, but many of us have felt being in a relationship with a narcissist can make you feel like a product on a shelf. Useful 1 minute, disposable the next. Your worth isn't grounded in who you are. It's measured by what you do, what you give, what you provide. And when you stop providing the attention, even the basic respect disappears. This belief sits at the core of narcissistic behavior. The unspoken rule is simply as long as you're useful to me, you matter. But once your usefulness runs out, or worse, once your needs start showing, you become a liability. Now, usefulness can take many forms. Maybe you're the one who always listens, the fixer, the peacemaker. You're the one who takes on more than your share because it keeps the peace or feeds their ego. Sometimes you're praised for it. Sometimes you're guilted into it. But either way, the message is clearing your value is transactional. It's that it's not you they care about. It's what you do for them. This is what makes narcissistic dynamics so emotionally draining. You're constantly performing, constantly evaluating whether you're doing enough. It's like being on an invisible treadmill, one where the speed keeps increasing and stopping isn't an option. Because the moment you pause to ask, hey, what about me? The reaction can be cold, even cruel. Do that. You might hear things like, you're being selfish, or you used to be different, or why are you making this so hard? Not because you've done anything wrong, but because you've stepped out of your role. You've shifted from a supplier to being a person with limits. And narcissists don't do well with limits, especially when those limits interrupt their supply chain. There's a philosophical truth buried in this. The German philosopher Martin Buber once described two ways of relating, it versus thou, and I it. Relationship, people are treated as objects, things to be used, categorized, or controlled. In an I-thome relationship, people are encountered as full beings with thoughts, emotions, and inherent dignity. Narcissists often live in the it world. They relate to people as extensions, as props. And that's what makes it so damaging, because no matter how much you give, it's never enough to earn true personhood in their eyes. Think about that. No matter how loving, loyal, or selfless you are, the narcissist's internal belief doesn't shift. Deep down, they still don't see you as autonomous. They see you as functional. And that leads to a devastating pattern. The more you give, the more they take. And the less they value it. Over time, this erodes your sense of self. You start tying your identity to your usefulness. You measure your worth by how much you can tolerate, how much you can give without breaking. And when you do finally break, the narcissist doesn't see it as a sign that they've taken too much. They see it as a sign that you failed them. This is why people stay stuck in these cycles for years. It's not just manipulation, it's identity confusion. When someone conditions you to believe that your value is tied to your output, walking away doesn't just mean leaving the relationship. It means confronting the fear that without serving someone else, you might not matter at all. But here's the reality. Your worth is not conditional. It is not defined by your ability to keep someone else emotionally regulated. You're a human buffer. You're not a vending machine for love, attention, or loyalty. You are a full person, even when you're not performing. Healthy relationships don't reduce to a function. They recognize your presence as valuable in itself. They make space for your needs, your growth, your humanity, not just your output. So if you've been feeling like a utility in someone else's life, take a step back. Ask yourself, if I stopped doing everything for this person, if I stopped bending, fixing, pleasing, would they still be here? Would they still value me? If the answer is no, that's not a relationship. That's a role you've been cast in. Do that. And the sooner you step out of it, the sooner you reclaim your self-worth. You are not here to be consumed. You are here to be seen. You know that sinking feeling when you realize someone you trusted could so easily swap you out? That's the devastating reality narcissists live by. In their world, relationships aren't bonds. They're contracts signed in invisible inking, subject to sudden termination whenever a better deal comes along. If you start to question their behavior, if you seek genuine connection, if you simply fail to uphold the illusion that keeps them comfortable, you become expendable. And they won't hesitate to treat you that way. Most of us assume that loyalty is a two-way street. We believe that if we show up day after day, caring and consistent, the people we love will stand by us. But with a narcissist, loyalty is a commodity traded for status, admiration, or convenience. When you serve their narrative perfectly, complimenting their achievements, validating their insecurities, ignoring your own ones, they'll keep you in their inner circle. You feel cherished. You feel safe. But all of it rests on a conditioning you must never outgrow your role. And what happens when you do? Imagine you find your own confidence, you speak up for yourself, or you simply expect basic respect. Suddenly, you've broken the unspoken rule. Do that. You're no longer useful in the way they need. They might start to cold shoulder you, accuse you of being disloyal, or turn the entire scenario around so that you are the one who looks unreasonable. They'll present you with an ultimatum, slip back into your place, or be cast or it's passed out. This isn't paranoia. Narcissists watch for any sign that they might lose control over the story they've written. And when someone steps off the script, they remove them as casually as changing a playlist. That person might be a partner, a friend, even a family member. It doesn't matter who you are to them historically. What matters is how you function in the present moment. If you cease to fit the model, you're replaceable. Why is this so heartbreaking? Because we all crave a sense of belonging. Do that. We want to know that our presence matters beyond the surface level, that we're valued not just for what we bring, but simply for who we are. Yet narcissists exploit that need. They tease you with belonging, then yank it away at the first sign of authenticity. Over time, this teaches you a cruel lesson. Vulnerability isn't rewarded. It's dangerous. You learn to police yourself, to bite your tongue, to stifle your growth. And in doing so, you shrink your own world to fit the boundaries someone else has drawn. The ancient existentialists spoke about the other, the idea that part of our identity is formed through the gaze of others. When that gaze is conditional, it warps your self-image. You begin to believe that you're only as worthy as someone else deems you to be. That dependency is exactly what narcissists cultivate. They need that power over you. It fuels their sense of significance. And it keeps you trapped in a cycle of seeking approval, terrified of being replaced. Breaking free means redefining what loyalty means. To yourself, it means acknowledging that your value isn't negotiable, that real relationships survive challenge and change rather than crumble under them. It means recognizing that someone who threatens to replace you at the first sign of independence isn't a partner in your life, but a consumer of your energy. And when you see that, you start shifting your perspective from fear of abandonment to fear of remaining trapped. But here's the most empowering truth. If they think someone else can do you better, let them try. Because you're the only one who can live your own life. No substitute can feel your thoughts, embrace your memories, or carry your dreams. And once you accept that, the power dynamic shifts. You stop begging for inclusion and start choosing authenticity. Do that. Even if it means standing alone for a moment, you'll find that as you surround yourself with people who celebrate your growth instead of punishing it, the threat of being replaced fades. You discover relationships built on genuine mutual respect, not on utility. And in those spaces, you don't just exist, you flourish. You learn that loyalty is a two-way street because both parties value each other's ongoing evolution. So the next time you feel that gnawing worry, am I enough? Remember this, you are irreplaceable. Do that. Not because of what, because of who you are. And anyone who fails to see that isn't deserving of your time, your trust, or your love. Reflect on that and choose the people who choose you, not the ones who view you as optional. Let's be honest. This one stings the most. It's the idea that deep down, the narcissist doesn't really see you. Not in the way you hope. Not in the way that matters. To them, you're not a complex, sovereign individual with an inner world, unique dreams, or a soul worth knowing. You're a reflection, a mirror. Someone whose primary function is to bounce their ideal image back at them. Clean, polished, undisturbed. And the moment you stop reflecting what they want to see, the image breaks. And with it, do that. So does the illusion of connection. What's heartbreaking here isn't just the manipulation or the gaslighting. It's the realization that the version of you the narcissist loves, or pretends to love, isn't really you at all. It's a curated version of you, a version edited for compatibility with their ego. Stripped of nuance, silence, struggle, contradiction. What they love is the projection, not the person. And that's where it gets philosophically disturbing, because to truly love someone is to encounter them in their full, unfiltered humanity. It means you're willing to witness them at their highest and their lowest. You don't turn away when things get inconvenient or uncomfortable or complicated. But the narcissist doesn't operate in that framework. They don't want to know you. They want to use you as a stabilizer for their own shaky sense of self. So when you disagree or challenge them, or even just change in a way they can't control, they feel personally threatened. Not because your evolution harms them, but because it forces them to confront the reality that you're not just a reflection. You are a person. And in their worldview, that's dangerous because it means they no longer have complete narrative control. This is why narcissists often respond to your growth with resistance or even punishment. If you start developing confidence, they might accuse you of arrogance. If you begin setting boundaries, they'll say you're being cold or selfish. They'll chip away at your clarity with subtle digs, emotional without drawl or outright rage. Why? Because your authenticity disrupts the fantasy. You're no longer playing your part in their movie. And narcissists hate when the script changes without their permission. Now, let's go deeper into the psychology. This inability to see others clearly is known as object constancy failure. It means they struggle to hold on to a stable, realistic image of someone when that person isn't behaving perfectly. You're either all good or all bad, loving or betraying, ideal or worth. There's no in between, no nuance, no space for complexity, which means the moment you step outside the lines, when you express a conflicting thought, show an emotion they don't like, or make a choice they don't understand, they don't just feel disappointed. They feel betrayed, and suddenly they don't see a person they love with flaws. They see an enemy, a disappointment, a threat. That's not how real connection works. Real love isn't fragile. It doesn't collapse when the other person reveals their true self. In fact, it deepens. It makes space for contradiction and struggle and imperfection. But narcissists live in a world where love is conditional. It exists only as long as you play your role without deviation. And what makes this dynamic so psychologically disorienting is how subtle it can be. In the beginning, the narcissist may shower you with attention, compliments, even emotional intensity that feels like deep intimacy. But what they're doing isn't bonding. It's mirroring. They reflect your desires back to you to make you feel understood. And then, once you're invested, they slowly shift the expectations. The reflection fades, and in its place, a script appears. One where your purpose is to serve their needs and suppress your own. That's not love. That's performance. And the longer you stay in that space, the more you lose sight of your own reflection. You start doubting your feelings. You begin eyeing yourself in real time. You become afraid to be seen because the person you thought was seeing you was only ever projecting. But here's what you need to remember. Being truly seen is not a luxury. It's a right. You deserve relationships where you don't have to rehearse, shrink, or shape just to stay accepted. You deserve to be loved for your reality, not for the illusion someone prefers to believe. So if you find yourself constantly adjusting, constantly questioning whether you're too much or not enough, pause. Ask yourself, am I being valued for who I am or tolerated for how well I perform? Because when someone only sees you through the lens of their ego, they never really see you at all. Do that. And that's not your failure blindness. Never dim your light just to become someone else's mirror. You weren't made to reflect. You were made to shine. Here's something few people fully grasp, and it's too late. When a narcissist seems obsessed with control, they're not just trying to dominate you. They're trying to outrun their own shame. And the heartbreaking part is that they'll use your self-doubt, your empathy, even your love as fuel in that escape. Most narcissists are not as self-assured as they appear. In fact, the louder the confidence, the deeper the cracks. Behind the grandiosity, there's usually a core belief that they are fundamentally unworthy. That if anyone saw who they really were, without the mask, without the charm, they'd be rejected. And instead of facing that shame head on, they project it onto you. So what does this projection look like? It's subtle. It's psychological. It's a slow erosion of your reality. You start out grounded, confident, clear in who you are. But over time, they chip away at that clarity. They twist your words. Rewrite history. Undermine your emotions with little comments like, you're too sensitive, or you're remembering it wrong. You're left questioning not just the relationship, but your sanity. This is not an accident. It's random. It's a defense mechanism. Because if they can make you the broken one, you the unstable one, then they never have to confront their own dysfunction. In their mind, they remain blameless, righteous, in control. But here's where it gets psychologically deep and disturbing. Narcissists often seek out people with empathy, people with emotional depth. Do that. People who want to heal, to connect, to make things work, because those are the people most likely to absorb their shame, carry the emotional weight, and question themselves instead of walking away. Your compassion becomes their camouflage. Do that. And if you've ever felt trapped in one of these dynamics, here's why. You're not just fighting for the relationship. You're fighting to prove that you're not the version of yourself they've painted, that you aren't selfish, that you aren't crazy, that you do deserve love. But the more you fight to prove your worth, the more control you give them. Because now they've successfully shifted the narrative. You're no longer acting from your own truth. You're reacting to their distortion of it. This is where philosophical insight meets psychological survival. The ancient Stoics believed that while we can't control the actions of others, we have absolute power over how we define ourselves. That no matter how twisted someone else's view becomes, we don't have to internalize it. That's the real antidote to narcissistic projection, radical clarity. Not just about who they are, but about who you are. When you stop defending yourself and start trusting yourself, the power imbalance begins to unravel. You see their blame games for what they are, distractions from their own unresolved pain. And instead of taking it on, you learn to set it down. You recognize that it's not your job to carry someone else's shame, especially when they've weaponized it against you. But let's be real. Breaking free from this dynamic isn't easy. It requires not just awareness, but action. You have to reclaim your voice, rebuild your reality, rewire yourself worth from something they control to something you define. And that takes courage. You might be misunderstood. You might have to walk away from someone you once loved deeply. But what you gain is priceless peace of mind, emotional clarity, and most importantly, the ability to look in the mirror and recognize yourself, not the fractured version someone else tried to convince you is real. Because at the end of the day, their belief about you, no matter how confident or cruel, doesn't define you. Their inability to face their own shame is not your burden to carry. You do not exist to absorb someone else's unhealed wounds. You exist to live your truth, even if it costs you the illusion of being understood by those who never truly wanted to know you. So the next time someone tries to make you know what you are, who you are, or what you've lived, pause, breathe, and remember your clarity is their chose. Your truth is your power. And no matter how hard they try to rewrite the story, you hold the pen now. You don't have to ever do that. You don't have to shrink to protect someone else's ego. You're here to stand tall for yourself.